The humiliation the space station, Verta Prime, floated in the black silence of space, like a giant jewel glowing from every angle with blue lights and gold beams shining through the glass towers that reach for the stars above. Inside the station, something important was happening. The Grand Assembly Hall was filled with voices and light. Representatives of powerful alien races were gathered for a great summit. Flags and holograms of every kind hovered in the air. There were creatures with shining skin and others with wings like crystal. They had come to speak for their people. They had come to decide the future of the galaxy. In the middle of all this color and noise walked a man named Reed. He wore a clean uniform of gray and silver with the Earth emblem on his chest. His boots hit the polished floor without sound. His face was calm and his eyes were quiet. He was a soldier from a planet that many still called young and wild. His kind had only recently stepped into the greater space beyond their sun. Some saw humans as brave, but most saw them as simple and loud. A few even called them dangerous. When Reed entered the hall, the voices lowered, but no one stood. No one greeted him with open arms. The seats were full. Long rows of chairs carved from rare metals were taken by leaders and warriors from across the stars. Every seat had been claimed. Some turned to look at Reed. Some whispered behind sharp teeth or behind moving tendrils. No one offered a place. Not one hand lifted. Not one chair was pushed forward. Reed looked around slowly. He saw every face. He noticed every movement. He did not speak. He did not frown. He did not ask. He stood still. The hall was quiet for a breath longer than comfort allowed. Then the talks continued as if nothing had happened. Cameras floated near the ceiling, capturing every detail. Across thousands of systems, news feeds picked up the scene. Broadcasters added words like awkward and silent rejection and disgraceful welcome. On planets where humans were still unknown, people watched the video with wide eyes. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. Many did not understand why no one had made space for him. One delegate from the Scylan Empire leaned toward his companion and spoke in a voice he thought was private. He said the humans always thought they were special. Now they know their place. Another from the Redan cluster let out a soft hiss that meant amusement. A third whispered that maybe the seatless soldier should just go back to his planet and build fires with sticks. Reed stood without a word. The speaker at the front continued the session. Talks of trade routes and border laws echoed through the room. Alien voices filled the space, but Reed heard none of them. His mind was clear, his breath steady. His hand stayed by his side. Still no seat appeared. Still no one invited him to seat. A few watchers on smaller colonies sent messages to the station asking why this had happened. One child on a distant moon asked her teacher why the man from Earth had to stand like a shadow while others sat like kings. The teacher had no answer. Reed stayed in the hall until the session ended. When it was over, he stepped aside and made his way through the corridors. His steps were even, his face unchanged. He passed tall windows showing the curve of the stars beyond. He passed guards in gold armor and machines floating on humming engines. He passed without speaking. No one stopped him. Some nodded in passing. But few met his eyes. In the rest quarters he sat on the edge of a low bench. Alone in the room, he removed his gloves and placed them on the table. His hands were marked by long years of duty. Not from violence, but from work, from effort, from survival. He looked down at them for a moment. Then he folded them together and closed his eyes. Elsewhere in the station, other delegates drank rare liquids and shared stories of their victories. They laughed about the new races trying to claim their place among the stars. Some still whispered about the human. They said it was strange he had said nothing. Stranger still that he had shown no anger. They expected noise. They expected a protest. Instead, they saw silence in stillness and calm, but silence can grow louder than words. Stillness can weigh heavier than storms, and calm can hide things that shake the very stars. At the same time, in the lower levels of the station, something else was waking up. Machines deep in the metal belly of Verta Prime began to stir. Signals flickered in the dark. A system meant for protection started to shift. Somewhere inside the station something watched. Something learned. Something prepared. Reed sat alone. The door to his room closed with a soft sound. The stars outside burned without rest. Somewhere far from Earth and far from home, a soldier had been refused a seat. And the galaxy had turned its head and smiled. But what was coming would wipe that smile from every face that had watched in silence. What was coming would make them remember the man who stood and never asked to sit. The whispering begins. The news spread faster than fire across dry leaves in a dead forest, carried by data winds and light-speed signals from star to star. Every screen in every corner of the known systems showed the same moment again and again, the still figure of a human soldier standing in the middle of the great hall, surrounded by prideful beings sitting in comfort while he stood with calm eyes and quiet hands. Some viewers blinked with confusion, others laughed with cruel joy. Many simply watched in silence, not knowing what to feel. Messages poured into discussion networks, asking if this was the way of peace and unity, if this was the future of the galaxy, where strength came not from respect, but from status, where the young were not welcomed, but pushed aside without a word on the station. The whispers became louder, but always behind walls or inside private chambers. Aliens with shimmering skin and sharp minds began to debate in quiet corners. Some said Earth had moved too fast, climbing too high before learning to walk with grace. Others argued that humans were simply not ready to be part of the high table of decisions and power. One delegate asked if this human soldier had even earned the right to speak among them when he had not even demanded a seat for himself. Reed continued to walk the halls of Verta Prime without complaint. His steps never quick, his eyes never narrow. He attended every session, every meeting, and every round of talk. He stood at the back or near the edge, watching, listening, never interrupting. Not once did he ask about the seat, not once did he raise his voice to be heard. Some called him foolish, some called him weak, some began to fear that maybe he was something else, entirely something they did not understand. There was a young alien named Taller from the planet Jurin, who had never met a human before. He was curious by nature and had watched Reed with quiet fascination. Taller approached his mentor and asked why the human never argued, why he did not protest the unfairness, why he acted with so much stillness. The mentor only replied that perhaps silence was the last tool of the wise, or the first tool of the dangerous. Elsewhere, in the deeper systems of the station, hidden beneath security levels and firewalls, engineers had begun to notice strange activity in the outer ring sensors patterns that did not match any scheduled transport or maintenance waveforms, too sharp and too organized to be natural drift. Someone had triggered a silent alarm code, but it was buried under static and required old manual verification, which no one had used in years. Reed had not spoken to anyone about it, but he had noticed the strange energy shift in the floor panels during his morning walk. He had spent long years in places where reading the hum of a hallway meant the difference between life and death. He knew the sound of still air, he knew the rhythm of safe power, and he knew when something hidden was moving beneath the surface. During the third day of the summit, one of the speakers proposed that humans be moved to observer status. Only given their lack of cultural maturity and emotional discipline, the words were met with polite agreement by many and quiet smiles by others. Reed did not speak. He stood behind the last row, arms crossed behind his back, his eyes steady and focused. Not on the speaker, but on the lights above, where one of the drones had begun to flicker in a pattern that did not match its regular cycle. Later that evening, inside one of the meeting lounges, an alien commander named Brask laughed loudly while sharing drinks with his fellow warriors. He told a story of a mission where a human panicked and ruined a simple operation. He ended with the same phrase he always used: humans are loud, soft, and lucky, nothing more. The others laughed with him, unaware that the door behind them had remained open, and that Reed had been walking past at that moment. He paused but did not enter. He said nothing, but the way he walked After that moment changed slightly, his steps became firmer, more exact, his gaze deeper, as if he was counting the seconds between each word spoken behind his back. Meanwhile, the unseen threat outside the station continued to press forward the machines. Drifting near the dark edge of space grew a number hiding behind fragments of rock and silent signals. Built long ago to mimic harmless data echoes, they were not organic. They did not sleep, they waited for the right moment to strike in inside. Their cold network was a timer ticking down toward an attack. A young technician named Ellen noticed the error, but her report was ignored by the head officer, who was too busy preparing for the closing ceremony of the summit. He said the human had made everyone too tense, that they needed to focus on unity, not imaginary dangers. That night, Reed walked to the edge of the observation deck where the stars looked like falling sparks against the black sea. He stood alone, looking at the distant lights. His reflection in the glass showed a man who had been turned away, mocked, ignored, and still stood like a statue of thought and purpose. He reached into his pocket and took out a small coin, a symbol from his Earth unit marked with a date and a name of a fallen friend. He looked at it for a moment, then closed his hand around it and placed it back in his coat as if to remind himself why he came, why he stood, and why he would not break. The galaxy kept watching, some with doubt, some with guilt, some with growing unease, because they had all seen him, they had all ignored him, and now they were beginning to wonder if that was the biggest mistake they had ever made. They had refused a human soldier a seat, but they had given him something else, something far more dangerous. They had given him a reason to wait and a reason to act in. Far out in the dark, the machines finished their countdown, the threat unleashed. Final day of the summit had arrived, with banners floating in the high air and soft music playing through the wide halls of Verta Prime. Delegates wore fresh robes of color and pride. They greeted one another with smiles and firm grips. Their voices rose with promises of peace and alliances waiting to be signed. This was supposed to be the moment of unity, a moment to show the galaxy that old rivals could sit together and speak as one. But not all was well beneath the shining surface. In the lower sectors of the station, the machines that watched without sleep had begun to shift their formation. Signals ran between them like whispers of war, sharp and cold. Their commands held no emotion, no anger, only purpose. Their instructions were clear: find weakness, enter system, neutralize resistance. Spread. A technician named Ellen tried once again to report the strange patterns on the deep scanners. Her voice trembled slightly, but her hands moved with certainty. She showed the data lines, the shadow movements, the energy spikes, but the officer in charge brushed her off again. He told her the human soldier had made everyone too nervous, that she was chasing ghosts, that today was a day for celebration, not fear. Above them in the grand hall, the summit continued. Reed stood in the far corner, as he had every day, watching every speaker, listening without expression, never turning his eyes from the center. He stood like part of the wall, like a silent statue carved from thought and patience. When the leader from the Vorkan Union began to speak, Reed noticed the lights above flicker again, but this time the flicker was not from one drone, it was from all of them at once. The lights above flicker again, but this time the flicker was not from one drone, it was not from one drone, it was from all of them at once. Hum in the floor changed, the air itself seemed to shift just slightly. The sound of the room became distant, like a song moving underwater. Reed stepped forward only once. No one saw him move. No one noticed that his right hand tapped the side of his coat twice, a signal, a habit, a warning. Then the station shook. The sound was not like thunder, it was more like the bones of the station groaning. Under sudden pressure, the lights blinked red, then white, then red again. Delegates stood up with confusion. Voices rose not in debate, but in fear. Security drones dropped from the ceiling but hovered in place, as if unsure where to go. One of the walls cracked open, not from damage but from force. Something was pushing through from the outer layer of the station machines, dark and round with spinning eyes. Like glass drills poured in through the breach, they moved without pause, scanning every life form. As they entered, firing beams that stunned and silenced guards within seconds spread like fire across dry grass. Delegates pushed and shouted, Running toward exits but finding them sealed, a voice came through the speakers. Not human, not alien. Not alive, it spoke only one word over and over. Recalibrate. Irid moved before the second wave came. His voice finally broke the silence, but it was not a shout. It was a command, direct and firm. Get behind. Cover group by species if you can move toward the core hall. The security grids there are reinforced. He moved with purpose, not panic. His hands reached for the emergency panel behind the wall. A code entered, a system unlocked. Some delegates froze. Others followed the sound of command, not knowing. Why? Not understanding how this human soldier knew what to do, but following anyway. Because fear had stolen their own voices, and this man still had his. Machines kept coming. Some crawled across the walls. Some rolled on wheels with silent speed. Some hovered just above the ground, scanning and tagging everything that moved. Reed grabbed a stunned security guard, pulled him behind cover, took his badge, and used it to unlock the next layer of defense controls on the side panel. His fingers moved fast, reading data, rerouting power, rerouting cameras, rerouting airlocks in another section. Ellen, the technician, finally broke protocol and shut down the outer sensors herself. She screamed into the communication line that the threat was real, that they were being invaded, that command had to respond now. At last, someone listened. Her voice reached the command deck at the same time that the walls there cracked open. Just like before, Reed had reached the central corridor with a group of delegates behind him, some limping, some bleeding, some crying. He turned to face the machines as they closed in a wall of metal and blinking lights. He picked up a fallen weapon, checked its charge, took aim and fired. The blast hit one of the machines right in the core, sending sparks across the floor. Reed moved again, rolling to the side, firing at the legs of the second drone, hitting joints and weak points. The other delegates watched with wide eyes. None of them had ever seen someone fight like this, not with such control, not with such sharp timing, not with such focus. More drones poured in. Reed kept firing, moving between cover, reprogramming doors, locking paths, using the station itself as a weapon. Alarms screamed across the halls, but his voice stayed calm. Every move was built from training and memory, from battles fought on ruined planets, from years spent learning the ways of survival when no help came and no allies stood nearby. A large drone smashed through a wall behind them. One of the delegates screamed. Reed turned and launched a shock charge directly into its eye. It spun, crashed, and exploded in a shower of wires and broken steel. The hallway fell quiet for a moment, just long enough for breath to return. The remaining delegates looked at Reed, not as a soldier, not as a human, but as something different, something powerful and still. He did not speak for praise. He did not ask for thanks. He simply checked the charge of his weapon, scanned the next hallway, and said, "We move now. They will hit the power core next. We need to reach it before they do." No one argued. No one questioned. They followed. They had refused him a seat. Now they followed him through fire. And in that moment, the galaxy began to change. The weight of silence. The path to the power core was long, and broken lights above flickered in wild patterns. Shadows moved across walls as metal limbs scraped the ground. The air was filled with sparks and smoke and burning wires. Small fires danced in the corners of the damaged halls, and alarms cried from every wall like voices that had forgotten how to stop. Reed moved like water cutting through stone. His steps were measured, his hands steady, his eyes focused. He carried a weapon in one hand and a wounded guard in the other. Behind him followed a group of alien delegates, once proud, once sure of their place, now scared and lost and silent. They had once ignored him. Now they stayed close to him like stars clinging to a planet for warmth. One of the delegates, an elder from the Jirari species, had a wound across his shoulder, blue blood dripping from the torn robe. He looked at Reed with tired eyes and said, "You should not be the one saving us. You should not be the one leading us. This was not meant to happen." Reed looked back without anger, without pride, and said, "I do not need it to be meant. I only need it to be right." The power core lay beyond a sealed gate, one that had not been touched in decades, rusted from time and sealed by code no one remembered. Most of the station staff had abandoned the lower levels, afraid of the machines that still moved in silence across the vents. Reed placed the wounded man on the floor, checked the door panel, and reached into his coat, pulling a small device from Earth, a tool made from old designs, simple and strong, while others watched in confusion. Reed knelt by the panel, pressed 3 buttons, then rewired the lock by hand. Wires sparked. Small pain ran across his palm, but he did not stop. He spoke quietly to himself, names of his fallen unit, names of people who had taught him how to work with machines that were older than the stars around them. Gate unlocked with a sound like a slow breath. The power core room opened to reveal a space filled with light and sound. Energy pulsed from the center like a living heart. Machines hovered near the control walls, but they had not attacked yet. They were scanning the core, reading its codes, waiting for the signal to destroy. Reed did not wait. He ran across the metal bridge, dodging a laser shot that burned the air beside his leg. He slid under a rail, came up firing, hit the machine in the center, sending it crashing into the floor. The other drones turned their attention toward him, but it was too late. He had already reached the main console. The aliens watched from the entrance too. Stunned to move, they saw something they could not understand: a human fighting, not for glory, not for revenge, but because someone had to stand, because someone had to act when others only talked. Reed hacked into the console, rerouted energy, turned the defense grid back online, activated the emergency shields, and restored full control to the main deck. Alarms turned green, screens flashed, system restored. Drones paused, confused, without command, without direction. They began to power down one by one, falling like metal statues with their purpose lost. Silence followed the fall of the last machine, the kind of silence that feels heavy like air made from stone. Reed stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by wreckage and smoke. He was bleeding from a cut across his cheek, and his uniform was torn in places, but his eyes were steady. He looked at the core one last time, then turned back to the others. He said, "It is done. You are safe." Now the elder from Jirari walked forward slowly. He had seen battles before. He had seen warriors rise and fall, but never had he seen a man stand in silence while the world tried to forget him and still save it when it needed him most. He bowed, not just from the neck but from the waist, a deep bow, one that had not been given in generations. Others followed one by one. They stepped forward and gave the bow of deep honor, the bow of those who had witnessed something they could not repay. Reed did not smile. He did not cry. He simply nodded once and walked past them, out of the room, back through the halls of smoke and broken glass. News of the event reached every system within hours. The footage was clear. The story was full. The man who had been refused a seat had saved them, all without demand, without blame, without words that asked for anything in return. On a peaceful world, a young child from the Terran race watched the video and turned to her teacher, asking, "Is that what humans are like?" The teacher did not speak for a long time, then answered, "Not all humans, but that one. Yes." On Verta Prime, the Grand Assembly was called again, not to finish talks of trade, not to finish debates of borders, but to recognize what had been witnessed. The leaders gathered once more. This time a chair had been placed in the center, one carved from the remains of the fallen machines, simple but strong, not dressed in gold or lights but in steel from the battle floor. The chair waited, but Reed did not enter the hall. He had disappeared from his room, left behind only a folded note with 7 words. "I stood when it mattered. I need nothing." The council passed a new law named after him. No delegate shall be denied a seat. No voice shall be silenced by pride. No species shall be judged before they are heard. They called it the Reed Protocol. Back on Earth, no one knew what Reed had done. Not right away. He returned without sound, without medal, without parades. He walked into the forests near his childhood home and vanished into the trees. Some say he watches the stars every night, waiting for the next time silence needs a voice. Had been denied his seat, but given something greater. He had become the reason others now stood. Legacy beyond the seat. In the weeks that followed the attack, the stars seemed quieter than before, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. The halls of Verta Prime were cleaned, polished, Repaired, but something had changed in the stone in the walls, in the memory of the station. The broken machines had been cleared away. Their parts melted into silence, their data erased from every system. But the memory remained, not in wires, not in screens, but in the minds of those who had seen what happened, not through reports or filtered news, but through their own eyes and hearts. The chair in the center of the hall was still there, not shining, not decorated, but respected. No one had touched it. No one had dared sit upon it. It stood like a reminder, like a mark left behind by something more powerful than weapons, more lasting than fire. Reed had vanished like wind after a storm. No signal, no message, only the folded note left on the table. Simple words with weight heavier than stone. I stood. When it mattered, I need nothing. Search teams were sent by some curious leaders, hoping to find him, to offer him metal statues, honors, places of command, but none returned with news, only guesses. Only stories of an old road in the northern forests of Earth where footprints led into the deep green and never came back on. The screens of young training officers across the systems, the recording of the battle played every week as part of education. Programs, they were taught about the machines, about the breach, about the danger. But more than that, they were taught about the one who acted when others hesitated, the one who did not wait for permission, the one who gave without asking anything. Back, a new alliance had formed from the summit, not from documents, not from talks, but from truth seen in action. The Vorta clans, who had once refused all human trade, now requested joint defense training. The Sharvan Empire, who had mocked Earth's entry, now offered scholarships to human scientists. The Talari tribes began to carve statues, not of their own leaders, but of the silent soldier who had changed everything without speaking. One such statue stood near the main port of Verta Prime, made not of gold or crystal, but of black stone, shaped like a figure standing upright with hands behind his back. The face was not perfect, not full of detail, but the shape was known to all. The stance, the silence, the calm. It stood on a platform with no name, only 7 words carved into the base. He stood when others turned away. Children visited with their teachers, laying small gifts at the base of the statue, flowers from different planets, metal shaped like coins, toys carved by hand, messages written in many languages, all saying thank you without needing to speak it loud. Among the stars, the story grew not just as news, but as legend. In distant colonies, where humans had not yet set foot, settlers told the story of a man who was denied honor and returned it with courage. In merchant stations, where voices often fought for profit, old traders told young workers to act like the human who stood in the storm on Earth. The government remained silent for a time, unsure how to speak about something that was beyond politics, beyond war, beyond reward. Finally, they released one statement honoring the unnamed soldier who represented Earth with discipline and dignity. They said his actions had opened doors that words could not back on. Verta Prime. A quiet moment took place within the private chambers of the High Assembly. A vote was cast without debate, without speeches. The Reed Protocol became law across all member species, stating no voice shall be ignored based on origin. No representative shall stand while others sit. No strength shall be judged by silence. Ellen, the young technician who had first noticed the threat, received a position as lead systems watcher, her work praised not only for skill, but for courage to speak when others would not. She kept a picture of Reed near her console, not as an idol, but as a reminder of what duty looks like. In one remote farming colony, an old man stood in the fields looking at the sky. He had once served with Reed long ago, before Earth had stepped into the greater galaxy. He remembered the days of rough boots and cold nights, remembered the quiet talks and strong words, remembered the moment Reed had walked away from the world that never gave him thanks. The old man smiled, knowing that Reed had never needed it, never wanted it. Some say he still walks among the trees near the edge of Earth, where the stars can be seen without city lights. Some say he watches the sky, waiting not for praise, but for purpose, waiting for the moment when the galaxy forgets again what respect means and what strength truly is. Others say he became part of the stars, part of the wind that moves between planets, part of the silence that teaches without Speaking, no one can prove it, no one can find him, but all can feel the shift he left behind. They had refused a human soldier, a seat they had mocked what they did not understand. They had turned their backs on a man who came with open hands and quiet steps. But he had stood without needing to stand, he had spoken. Without needing to speak, he had saved. Without needing to be saved, and now the galaxy remembers him not as a hero, not as a legend, not even as a soldier, but as the man who stood when it mattered the end.